Now, we know that a lot of the critics over at Rotten Tomatoes, they don't really like horror movies all that much, so I'm curious if Rotten Tomatoes prefers the original, the Amityville Horror, or the remake. Let's see if I agree. All right, so these two movies will be sorted by the lowest tomato meter score to the highest tomato meter score. So how the hell does Rotten Tomatoes feel about one of the highest grossing horror movies of all time and one of the most important horror movies ever in the haunted house subgenre versus its remake? Well, coming in second place is going to be the Amityville Horror remake from 2005, coming in with a 24% tomato meter score and a 52% audience score. The critics' consensus for this one goes a so-so remake of a so-so original. Really, guys, that's the best you could come up with? That's it? All right, anyways, moving right along, let's read some critic reviews as well. This critic came in and said the remake was fresh. They gave it a 3 out of 5, and they said, the Amityville remake is a serviceable mid-tier entry in the 2000s remake craze. It's not terrible, but aside from the lingering body shots of Reynolds running around in low-waisted pajamas in the rain, it's not particularly memorable either. I mean, there's some forgettable things in this movie. There's definitely some recycled material here. Without a doubt, it feels very much like, in some ways, a generic early 2000s remake. And we'll talk about all of that, of course, but yeah, I mean, Ryan Reynolds runs around this damn movie just half naked half of the time. And he is shredded, no doubt about that. So if that's your thing, then yeah, this is gonna work for you. The next critic said this movie was rotten, like a lot of critics have, and they gave this movie a 2 out of 5, and they said, this Amityville Horror feels less like a film and more like a greatest hits compilation of scenes from better movies. And like I kind of said a second ago, there is a lot of that. There's a lot of scenes and shots where you're like, oh, I've seen that before. Or that's just kind of like to get a quick scare or a jump scare, or, you know, like that's stuff that I've seen in other demonic horror movies or just other horror movies in general that are very like corny. And yeah, a lot of that stuff was happening in the early 2000s, definitely. You know, the CGI craze was going wild in horror movies during this time. So they were kind of, I mean, directors were feeling very confident, like we could put anything in this movie now because we've got like this technology that we can use. Not always that great, but still. Really though, all right, with the remake. So is it true that houses don't kill people? People kill people? Well, we'll see. So yeah, the Amityville Horror remake is another one of those Platinum Dunes remakes. So at the very least, I've mentioned this before, like Platinum Dunes, the company owned by Michael Bay, they do a great job with some of their movies. And at the very least, the Platinum Dunes movies, at least the ones that I've seen, which has been a shit ton of them, I mean, they look good. You know, the sound design, I think overall is usually pretty good. And there's definitely some competency there in that way. This movie has kind of that similar look with like the Texas Chainsaw remake and the 2009 Friday movie, both Platinum Dunes productions. It looks like that. It has that 2000s horror movie look to it. It's almost like a little washed out and a little bit like they've turned down the saturation a little bit. And I don't mind it. For me, a lot of nostalgia there, of course. Like this is an era, and I've mentioned this, if you've been around my channel for a minute, you know what I'm talking about. This is an era I do have a lot of nostalgia for. I think it looks good. But right off the bat in the movie, we get a flashback, very similar to the original movie, of course, showing us kind of what all went down. And I can't lie though, I hate how flashy this flashback is. That sounds a little ridiculous, but I hate the lighting in that flashback. I just talked about how good the movie looks, but I mean, that lighting in that flashback is like straight up out of a rave. And I'm just thinking when I'm sitting in my chair, I am way too sober for this right now. That's just too much, but still, like, it's a 2000s movie, so the intro is bloody. It's pretty scary. It's pretty horrific with the stuff happening to kids and whatnot. You know, it's just horrifying. You know, especially being a dad myself. I mean, these kids getting killed. And it's similar to some stuff you could talk about with like a Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, it's like the vulnerability of the situation that they're in. What's one of the most vulnerable places a kid or a teenager can be, right? When they're sleeping in their bed, they're cozy, they're completely at peace in some ways. And damn, like, that's when the kids get killed in this movie. And it's horrific. No matter if it's remade or it's in the original, that's always going to be horrific, right? I mean, really though, except for Jody. Jody was the one kid who was actually awake in that whole moment. And of course, they had to like make her say something really like super cute just to kind of nail that dagger right into your heart, which is brutal. You know, one thing with remakes, and I'm very easy on remakes. Some of you have heard me talk about this before, but I enjoy remakes. I love a lot of them. Some of them can be a great time, even if it's just recycled, because especially when it's from a title that I love, an IP that I really enjoy, hell, just give me more of it. Take a swing at it. I don't care. Maybe you'll come up with something cool. And there are some cool aspects of this movie, but one of the gripes with remakes for me is, you know, I do like it when they try some new things. In this movie, a lot of it is very recycled. And, you know, they start off, they're at this house that they can't afford. Oh, it's a deal, right? You know, similar to what we see in Nightmare on Elm Street and some other movies, but, you know, it's a tale as old as time, right? Cheap house, so what's the catch? Yeah, people were murdered here, no big deal. But, you know, they're walking around with a realtor, another kind of recycled scene from the original. But yeah, damn shady ass realtor, you know? She's just like she even sees a ghost pass by, or like a spirit or whatever, that thing pass by, and she's just like, oh, we're just gonna come good and keep that quiet, you know what I mean? Oh, is that blood on the wall? Oh, no, don't worry about that. That just adds character. That will add a little bit of value. Makes the house feel lived in. Damn shady ass realtor. But I will say with the remake, we do kind of get to know the kids' personalities a little bit more. We get to find out kind of what happened to their father and how it's affecting them a little bit. And I think that's good. And yeah, because this movie's in 2005, they can show us more. In the original, the technology's not there, so they kind of just keep everything invisible. But in this movie, they can use more of their imagination. They can show us more of these demons. And the CGI is not terrible. But yeah, I mean, there is like probably way too many jump scares in this movie. On one hand, it's like, okay, then it becomes like this fun, almost like date movie where, you know, the person next to you, the person you're taking out, you know, they'll just be constantly jumping and hanging on to you. And that's fun. And that, you know, there's always going to be a niche for that type of a movie. But again, maybe because they didn't have a lot of budget constraints or just really the technology, they're able to show us more. But anyways, before we get more into that, let's read a couple more critic reviews, because this is a remake, and a lot of critics like to shit on this movie, and some of the reviews are hilarious to me. So, the next critic came in and gave this movie a 40 out of 100. Okay, sure. And they said, I can't escape the feeling that if you were to put me in a room with an editing machine, the raw footage, and a collection of sound effects, I could have made a better film. It's like, all right, bud, you know, while you're sitting there in your basketball shorts that have shit stains on them, keep telling yourself that, you know, when you've probably never made anything in your entire life that anybody cares about, keep telling yourself that, right? But this movie, like, let's not get ridiculous here. The sound design is solid. The way the movie's shot is solid. Just the cinematography, the acting, all that is solid. Little ridiculous. The next critic gave this movie a C. And they said, the babysitter, whose fashion sense seems aimed at exercising the pants off her hips. If ghosts like to suck tequila out of belly buttons, she has come to the right place. Yeah, the babysitter scene is pretty hilarious. And, you know, I mean, it feels very early 2000s, right? I mean, it's actually a pretty cool scene, and it's kind of scary. The whole closet scene with her, I like that. I like the way it's shot. I like the way it's shot in the original too, but in this, I think it's fun. And I think it's just an overall good time. And like I said, just feels very much like this era. Like she's in the bathroom, ripping the bong, and then, you know, scares the kids by telling them what happened in the house and things like that. I don't hate that scene. I think it's hilarious and it's a fun time. I also think it's effective in this movie how they just kind of turn up the assholeness of George's character a little bit more. I will say though, I mean, Ryan Reynolds, of course, after Deadpool has just become this massive star. A guy that I really liked in his early movies when nobody knew who he was. Not to be that guy, but like Van Wilder. Love that movie. What a classic comedy. In this movie, he's just okay. He has his lane. He plays the same character in essentially every movie. Deadpool is basically Van Wilder, but a superhero. And that's what he does, and he does it very well. But in this movie, like I said, just kind of okay. I don't think Ryan Reynolds is nearly as good as James Brolin in the original, in my opinion. I mean, in the end, it's this story of this family who's been through a lot, man. These kids have been through a lot. The wife has been through a lot. I mean, in hell, they're barely getting by, and they finally feel like they have some sort of a break in life. Like, maybe this is our chance. A lot of people say with these movies, just run. Like the first couple signs that you're seeing here, you should be out of this place in 2 seconds. But if you really think about it, I mean, they're trying to hang on to this like hope for as long as they can because they just haven't had much of it. I mean, even Ryan Reynolds' character is a very blue collar guy, doesn't have a lot of money. They even talk about like how if they buy this house, even at the discount, like they're going to be basically barely getting by regardless. I also think the scene with the rooftop with the little girl, the daughter, is pretty intense. Plus you add on top of that, like the fact that the ghost girl, Jody, is telling the little girl like that they promise to let her see her dad again if they just follow their direction. You're just like, damn. The priest though in the remake is terrible compared, in my opinion, compared to the priest in the original. In this movie, they're like, hey, everything's going on, like help us, please, anything, and just something, dude. And the priest is just like, your house scares me. Okay, thanks, man. Little help here? All right, I guess not. Good talk. But at the very end, the ending with the dead girl being pulled into the floor, to me, it just seemed completely unnecessary and completely corny to me. Not something that kills the movie, but I just felt like they had a little bit of momentum and that was pretty stupid. But all in all, I think this remake is acted well enough. I think it looks solid, like I mentioned, and it's got some similar good feels and kind of the vibe of the original in some ways with like the rain and the thunder and all that going on. You're looking for kind of a cozy movie to watch, and I enjoy that. I think that vibe is good. I do wish the remake had more autumn vibes to it, but to me, especially because I have nostalgia for this era, it's still an entertaining movie with some fun scares for like that early 2000s sort of a feel. So would I agree with the remake being number 2, being the worst version of the 2 movies? I would agree. Yeah, I do think the remake is worse than the original. So yeah, of course, the original Amityville Horror is coming in first place, technically out of the first 2 movies, or out of the 2 movies. So yeah, the Amityville Horror from 1979 coming in with a 31% in the tomato meter score and a 52% audience score. So the exact same audience score as the remake. Surprisingly, in some ways. I mean, I thought the remake would be just a little lower for the audience. The critics, not surprising, but still, only 31% from the critics for the original Amityville Horror. Like I said, one of the highest grossing horror movies ever adjusted for inflation, and one of the biggest haunted house horror movies ever too. The critics' consensus for the original goes, dull and disappointing. The best that can be said for the Amityville Horror is that it set a low bar for its many sequels and remakes. And I just wouldn't agree. I mean, is this the greatest horror movie ever? No. But there's a lot to like here. In particular, though, the cast. And we'll talk about that. So let's read a couple critic reviews as well for the original. The first critic said this movie was fresh. They gave it a 7 out of 10, so they still didn't think it was great. But they said Brolin and Kidder carry the film, their conviction encouraging you to believe even if you don't. And I would agree with that. There's going to be some things, if you watch this movie like I did, where you're like, oh, come on. Like, that doesn't look real. It's 1979, but still, like, that's not great. That's not that scary. But Brolin and Kidder do carry this movie. No question. The next critic said this movie was rotten, and they gave it a 1.5 out of 4. Again, how nice of you. Just that 0.5 extra. Thank you. We watched 2 hours of people frightened and dismayed. And we ask ourselves, what for? If it's real, let it have happened to them. Too bad, Lutzes. If it's made up, make it more entertaining. If they can't make up their minds, why should we? And yeah, like I already mentioned, one of the gripes with this movie is, like, what are you doing? Make up your mind. Leave, stay. What is happening? Just do something, which is also funny to watch at the same time. But the intro to this movie, I think, is better than the remake to me, and I'll mention why. So in the remake, I get it. There's going to be some things, when you're remaking a movie, you're going to see things in the original that you just love. But you still kind of need to tweak it or make your own little twist on it in some sort of a way. But I like the more subtle intro in the original, where you barely get to see any of the killings, and then it cuts to the cops being there. So you're seeing the bodies being carried out, and you get to see the principal also from Back to the Future. You're like, oh, recognize that guy right away. But yeah, I like the more subtle intro here. And I like the shot where the intro ends and the coroner's door gets shut to the car, and the chaos of like the whole crime scene and just everything going on there immediately cuts off, and it's quiet. and it's just us sitting down and watching. There's rain on the windows, the darkness of the night, and with the dead body. I don't know. There's something about that. The chaos cuts off and it's just us with the dead body. I like that shot. That's a cool creative choice, something small, but something I liked. And then we cut, of course, 1 year later, and, very similar, like I said, to the remake, but this is the original, of course. So, we got George. We get introduced to George and his wife. George, Mr. Brolin, looking like he just stepped right out of a Just for Men commercial. Like, this dude's beard is on point. But yeah, I like the idea also as George and his wife are going through the house, and you just get the little, as they go to this room and this room, that's when they start to give us more of what happened in the house. The little flashbacks, boom, boom, to what happened as they're going through the house. And I like that. I think that's very effective and really just nails home the whole feeling of, damn, there is some bad juju in the air in this house. Also, I gotta mention, and I like the remake, how it's set in that 70s era. Love that. I did not mention that, but this movie is actually in the 70s. And especially for a demonic possession haunted house, just a scary movie, autumn vibe kind of a movie, I think the 70s aesthetic is perfect for that. I mean, already the cars were like very brown and orange, and the clothes were too. A lot of plaid in this movie, and hiking boots and chopping wood and stuff. And I just think the aesthetic of that, especially in the 70s, is great. And there's some great fall vibes. Like, this is a movie that is a great movie to put on in September and October and beyond, without a doubt. Like, you can just feel like the crisp breeze through the TV, like that crisp lake breeze. Also, in the original, the music is surprisingly very good. The main score is great and really just nails the movie home for me, and makes things even more effective. And some of the scenes very good because of that. Definitely a gripe that I do have with the original is we get a little bit of a backstory on the kids and the family in the remake, whereas in the original, we don't even really know who these kids are. We don't really get to see much of their personality or what they're doing or what they're up to. I mean, yeah, we kind of know what the dad is doing for work. We see that he's a surveyor on his van, and we also meet like his coworker, and like we can see that shit's kind of going wrong at work because he's so distracted. But still, like, what exactly does he do for work? What's he up to? What does the mom do? I guess she's a stay-at-home mom. The family, they don't do a great job in this movie with the family and building the story around them in some ways. But still, because of the acting and the chemistry between George and Kathy, I still definitely find myself rooting for them and liking them a lot, and wanting them to like come out of this in one piece. But yeah, I mean, there is a part of me that wishes we got just a little bit more with the family. I also think, yeah, in the remake with Ryan Reynolds' character, like, he's funny and he's likable in the beginning. He's a good like stepdad or future stepdad to those kids. But I do think in this movie, they do a little bit of a better job building up how George is changing, how he's kind of slowly starting to act a little bit different. He kind of snaps in and out of it at times based on, of course, where he's at and stuff. And that does happen to Ryan Reynolds too, but I just think they do a better job of it in this movie. All right, let's read two more critic reviews. So this critic said the movie was fresh, and they said a middling horror entry from 1979 that's a masterpiece when compared to the dreadful 2005 remake. And yeah, around this 1978, 1979 era, this isn't like the best horror movie out of all the bunch, but yeah, I mean, clearly they don't like the remake, right? This next critic said this movie was rotten, and they said the Amityville Horror is just another indication that the trail left by The Exorcist has now become too faint to be worth following. And yeah, I mean, when you watch a movie like this, The Exorcist, one of the most iconic horror movies ever, an all-time classic, you can't help but think about it, but I don't think there's too much ripped off in a movie like this compared to The Exorcist. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's recycled, of course, but I don't think it's too much where it becomes obvious or ridiculous. I mean, we're seeing movies nowadays in 2024 that are completely ripped off of The Exorcist, like scenes directly taken off of The Exorcist. This movie, not so much in some ways. So I like that aspect of it, and I think they add some fresh scenes in here as well. To talk about, Father Frank, right? The remake, not a good character at all. You're like, what are you doing? Why are you even here? You do not care. I think in the original, the whole scene with Father Frank arguing with the mayor from Jaws, that guy, who now in this movie plays some guy who's high up in the church, but I think that scene is some damn good acting. I enjoyed that. And Father Frank is just overall way better in this movie than in the remake, and is a good character and somebody you're kind of interested to see how he's going to navigate in this whole experience as well, because he's trying, a little different than the one in the remake. But yeah, of course, I mean, after all the shit that went down in the basement in this movie, and after damn near 20 days of this stuff, it's like, I feel like you have zero reason not to leave at this point. I mean, on day 19, the mom suggests that they leave, but doesn't really try all that hard. Speaking of counting the days, I like that aspect of it. I know it's not that unique. We've seen other movies where they count the days or they have chapters or whatever have you, but with this movie, I think that does a really good job of kind of building the mood and the tension and letting it kind of peak on its own. And then of course we get that text of the last night, which I think is great. To me, I'm sitting there like, oh shit, like, is he gonna kill everybody? Like we saw in the intro, is it gonna take him over completely? What's gonna happen? And then on top of that, we have people who are very confident. They know that something's happening here and they need to intervene with it. So we've also got that layer of these different characters trying to prevent it, and these different characters and George and what's gonna happen to him. And I think that's great. I really love how they pull that off. And then of course at the end, like, they're finally getting away. We can kind of exhale, right? Nope. George stops and then he runs back. And I'm like, oh shit, is he gonna go and get the axe? No, he's not. He's just gonna get the dog. And then he falls to the ground into the blood and all of that. It's great. Feels very much like this era, but still, I think it's a fun scene. The dog helps to save him, and I think that's a good time. But overall, with this movie, the original Amityville Horror from 1979, the mood, the atmosphere, the music in this movie is great. And just overall, the aesthetic of this movie is really something that I enjoy. And I prefer the original over the remake for those reasons and the reasons that I mentioned. And really also, one of the biggest reasons is because of James Brolin and Margot Kidder. Their characters, their chemistry together. This is not a super unique story, but because of what they do in the movie, I think is really effective, and they're just like stars in this movie and really top notch. But anyways, everybody, there you go. That is how Rotten Tomatoes feels about the Amityville Horror versus its remake, and also how I feel. So I do agree with them having the remake in second place out of the two movies. So both solid movies though, both have their goods and bads without a doubt. But anyways, everybody, thanks so much for watching. If you want some more content from me right now, go ahead and check out one of these videos next to me. If you want more content in the future, the best way to be notified of that is to subscribe. But my name is Matt, and I will talk to you in the next one.